Thank you very much. Stand by, ladies and gentlemen, in 8 seconds. 5.
Senator Obama, welcome again. You must have some affiliation here. Is that,
yeah, I've got a slight home court advantage here. This is my alma mater, and I want to thank you. I was saying, though, that the neighborhood's changed. When I came here in 1980, some of the apartments around here didn't look quite like what they look like now, and I could afford them then. I don't think I can now. Yeah.
Faculty housing is still good. Today is 9/11. You were down at Ground Zero with Senator McCain. And we're going to ask a lot of the similar questions that we asked to Senator McCain. And the first one we asked was, what does 9/11 mean to you? What's the significance of it? Where were you when it happened, for example?
Well, I was in Chicago. I was in the state legislature at the time. I still remember driving down Lakeshore Drive on my way to a committee hearing downtown and hearing the initial report. And it was still confused then whether it was an accident, what had happened. By the time I got downtown, we started evacuating the buildings, and then we all watched in horror on television. And it, like I think for most people, it is indelible. And it is a reminder not only of the terrible potential for evil in the world, but it's also a reminder of what America does at the toughest times, which is to come together. I mean, when I think of 9/11, I think of that spirit after the tragedy had occurred, how the outpouring of patriotism, emotion, volunteerism, the desire for service was in the minds of everyone. And that was also a moment when the petty bickering and partisanship that comes to characterize our public life was set aside. And so the question is, how do we recreate that spirit, not just during times of tragedy, not just during 9/11, but how do we honor those who died, those who sacrificed, the firefighters, the police officers? How do we honor them every day? How does it reflect itself in our government? How does it reflect ourselves in how we conduct our own civic life? My sense is that the country yearns for that. It's hungry for it. And what has been missing is a president and a White House that taps into that yearning in a serious way.
Well, Senator McCain actually agreed with that a few minutes ago. He said that if he had been president, he would have used that opportunity to ask the country to serve, to ask people to serve. What's different about what you're saying?
Well, I'm not sure there is anything different. What I know is that had I been president at the time, and I have to say the president did rally the nation in a speech at Ground Zero, and subsequently we went after those who had attacked us appropriately. But rather than tell the American people to shop, what I would have done is to say, now is the time for us to meet some great challenges. We've been tested, and yet we have survived, and we are going to be stronger than we were. And the way we're going to be stronger than we were is to tap into the feeling that everybody has been caught up in. We're going to have a bold energy plan that says that we are going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil by 20 or 30% over the course of a decade or two. We are going to ask all citizens to participate in that process, not just government, but each and every one of us are going to make commitments in terms of increasing fuel efficiency in our cars and our homes, and the government is going to be in partnership with citizens to make that happen. We are going to tap into this desire when it comes to first responders. One of the striking things as you travel around the country is the number of small towns and medium-sized towns that rely exclusively on volunteer firefighters. And think about what we could have done all across the country as part of a Homeland Security initiative to organize groups around the country that could serve in those common ways. And I would have asked very explicitly for young people to engage in community service and military service. I was listening earlier, the discussion about who serves in our military. And I think that had the president very clearly said this is not just going to be a war of a few of us, this is going to be an effort that mobilizes all of us, I think we would have had a different result.
What are, Senator Obama, the obligations of citizenship in a democracy? Basically, in America now, people vote, only about half of them, and they pay their taxes, and that's about where the bar is. What would you ask of people in what you call, I believe, active citizenship? How is that different than what we see now?
America is the greatest country on earth, but it didn't just happen on its own. It's not a gift only, although it is a great blessing that we've received. It is also a responsibility. And part of what makes America work is the fact that we believe in individual responsibility and self-reliance, but we also believe in mutual responsibility, in neighborliness, in a sense that we are committed to something larger than ourselves. Now that can express itself in a whole range of ways, but what has built this country is people sense through voluntary associations, but also through public service and government, that we have commitments that extend beyond our immediate self-interest, that aren't always motivated by profit, that aren't simply short-term, that we're thinking long-term to the next generation. And every bit of progress that we've made historically is because of that kind of active citizenship. And as president, what I want to do is restore that sense of common mutual responsibility, and I think the American people are ready for it.
But give us some examples, specific examples of how you would do that, because people listening would say, oh, it all sounds well and good, but how would you do that?
Well, let's talk very specifically about...
And we just have a minute left.
Okay, well, it'll carry over, but I put forward a very specific national service plan, and I'm glad to see that my dear friend, Senator Kennedy, as well as a fine Senator, Senator Hatch, have come together and taken many of the similar elements. They're going to be introducing it tomorrow. One way of making sure that we encourage this kind of citizenship is to start early, to make sure that our young people in high school have community service opportunities, making sure that our university students, in exchange for making college affordable, are giving something back, that they're working in underserved communities, that they are teaching, that they're working in hospitals that need help. I've got all kinds of other stuff, Judy, but I'll wait till after the break.
We are going to take a break. Thank you for announcing that, and we'll be right back.
Service Nation is sponsoring this event. The group is working to increase the number of people who commit a year of their lives to national service. Here's an interview with an organizer.
Michelle Nunn, CEO of the Points of Light Institute. What is the Service Nation?
Well, Service Nation is a coalition of organizations that's led with Be the Change, City Year, and Civic Enterprises, and Points of Light Institute, and really over 100 other organizations and lead partners and supporters. And we are looking to raise the issue of service and civic engagement for the country and to create a new threshold of possibility for how people are involved in their communities, and specifically to create a nation in which over 100 million volunteers are participating annually, and over 1 million volunteers have the opportunity to participate in full-time service, like AmeriCorps and Peace Corps.
And then you're holding this candidate forum. What's the idea behind it?
Yeah. Well, we think what's really exciting and important, especially on this day of September 11th, is to call attention to the fact that at least one thing that both candidates agree upon is the idea of really calling our nation to action and calling people to serve and to make a difference in their communities and to their country and in the world. And we think it's really notable, and we think we really want to call out and ask these candidates how they are going to take that that principled commitment and turn it into real legislative policy and change, and how their vision will translate into the ability for Americans to really participate in changing their democracy and changing their country.
Talk about how you were able to set this up.
Well, as you can imagine, it is not an easy task to pull together both presidential candidates, and so after a lot of inquiries and entreaties from a variety of leaders, volunteers, and grassroots folks across the country, both candidates did agree, and I think that it, poised here in New York on September 11th couldn't be a more fitting setting.
There are two 45-minute back-to-back interviews. How did you decide the format?
Yeah, the campaigns came together and negotiated that, and it seemed we did not want it to be a political debate, but really an affirmation of commonality. So they'll have the chance to point out their particular ways of delivering on their vision for service, but also really wanted to, I think, demonstrate that this is an opportunity for unity and for shared vision.
John McCain is up first. Did you decide who goes first based on a coin toss, or how did it work?
I believe that's correct.
Michelle Nunn, CEO of the Points of Light Institute. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
The U.S. Labor Department says that nearly 61 million people volunteered in 2007. Going back now to Columbia University and the presidential candidate interviews on service being moderated by Time Magazine managing editor Richard Stengel and PBS political editor Judy Woodruff.
Senator Obama, you do indeed have a comprehensive national service plan, and it's mentioned in our magazine this week on national service. But here's my question. Bill Clinton also had a very comprehensive national service plan, and he had to tailor a lot of what he had proposed with AmeriCorps and other policies because of the unions, because of teachers' unions, because of public unions. Wouldn't you have to kind of cut back the scale of some of what you have done, or have you done that already, to make sure that the unions will go for it?
I don't think so. Look, the spirit of unions is coming together because we are stronger together than we are individually. That's the idea behind the union movement. And I think the times have changed since 1992. I think that people recognize, for example, that we can't continue a education system that fails so many of our young people. And we need an all-hands-on-deck approach. And I think not only teachers' unions, but teachers themselves recognize that if there are volunteers, if we've got retirees who are scientists and mathematicians who are willing to come in the classroom and provide additional help to young people and inspire them into different careers, I think that they're going to welcome it. So, look, do I expect that my national service plan gets passed exactly as I've proposed? Of course not. That's not the way legislation works. But I believe we are in one of those special moments, one of those defining moments, where the American people recognize that we are not on the right track, that our government is not working the way it should, that our economy is not working the way it should, and they expect leadership from Washington, but they understand that they have to be a part of the solution as well. And I think that's why we have to seize this moment, and the next president is going to have to actively pursue these issues of service.
When we asked Senator McCain some of these questions, he said several times, he said there is a government role in all of this, but he said we should be careful about how much we scale up and increase the role of government. I want to come back to something we raised with him, and that is that those young people who are interested in the Peace Corps, Teach for America, not all of them can afford, frankly, to come out of school and take a very low-paying job, no matter how much they want to serve. What would be the responsibility of the government and others to make it easier?
Well, first of all, I think Senator McCain is right that income does not determine whether or not people serve. You can go into small rural towns and people are really scraping by, and yet they are helping each other in all sorts of ways. But what I agree is that the choices that we provide young people right now are too constrained. When I graduated from Columbia, I had a choice. I could pursue a lucrative career on Wall Street or go immediate to law school, or I could follow through on the inspiration that I had drawn from the civil rights movement and from the Kennedy era and try to work in the community. And I chose the latter, but it was tough. I made $12,000 a year plus car expenses in Chicago, working with churches to set up job training programs for the unemployed and after-school programs for youth, trying to make the community better. It was the best education I ever had, but ironically, it was harder for me to find that job than it was for me to find a job on Wall Street. And I think there are a lot of young people out there who are interested in making that same choice, and we should be encouraging them. The government's going to have a role. Look, young people can't afford college right now, and one of my central platforms in this campaign is we're going to provide a $4,000 tuition credit, every student, every year, but in exchange for giving something back. And so young people of modest means who are interested in going to college, this gives them an opportunity to serve and at the same time pay for their college education. I think there are a lot of creative ways where we can provide more opportunities than exist right now.
Now, the role of government is something we talked a little bit about with Senator McCain. Republicans have traditionally said, and I'm thinking, for example, of Newt Gingrich, who I know is not one of your advisors, but said that the problem with big government is that it gets in the way of private initiative. And as government grew over generations, that in fact it repressed public service and it repressed national service because there was no room for it anymore. So some Republicans worry, well, he's going to make such a big government that won't even leave room for private initiative.
Look, I think those are old arguments. Let's look to the future. The fact is that we have to have government. When a hurricane strikes, as it did with Katrina, we have to have a FEMA that works, which, by the way, means that we should be encouraging young people, the best and the brightest, to get involved as civil servants, to pursue careers of public service, so we've got people who are trained in federal emergency management who are able to take on the job. Now, that does not crowd out the Red Cross, that doesn't crowd out the thousands of church groups that went down there. What it means is that each area has a role to play. The Peace Corps does not crowd out opportunities for service overseas. You've got churches and synagogues and mosques all across the country that are deeply involved in efforts to deal with HIV/AIDS and malaria and all sorts of public health issues. And yet, this is an area where George Bush, I think, appropriately said, we're going to make a commitment as the wealthiest nation on earth to deal with the devastation of AIDS, and his PEPFAR program has been highly successful, working with non-for-profits, working with governments, working both public and private in order to solve a problem. So there are more than enough problems out there to deal with. And what is true is we don't need to set up bureaucracy. See, I would distinguish between a government assist in providing people avenues for service and a government bureaucracy in which the notion is that the only way you can serve is through some defined government program.
And I do want to pick up on that just briefly, because as we said earlier, tonight is not a night to focus on contrast between you and Senator McCain, but help us understand how you see the role of government in all this differently from the way he does.
Well, you know, listening to his presentation, it sounds like he's interested in the AmeriCorps program and Peace Corps. I think it is terrific that we can garner some bipartisan support. That was not always the case. I believe firmly that government should expand avenues of opportunity. I want to create a energy corps, a clean energy corps that can mobilize individual citizens to help create greater energy efficiency in our country. I want to mobilize seniors to get involved with their schools or their local hospital or health clinic. So there are going to be a whole range of ways that we can do it. Some of that's going to cost money, but mostly it requires government providing these opportunities and these avenues, and a president who's willing to inspire people to get involved and get outside of themselves. That's something we're doing in this campaign, and that's something I think I can do as president.
Senator Obama will be right back after this break.
This event being held on the campus of Columbia University. Back-to-back interviews with presidential candidates Senators John McCain and Barack Obama. An article in the Politico about this event tonight. The two presidential candidates will call a truce in New York City on Thursday night for a conversation on the 7th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks about what their administrations would do to encourage public service. The summit is part of a campaign aimed at getting comprehensive bipartisan national community service legislation passed by Congress and signed into law by September 11th, 2009. The groups plan to push for that by working with the next president in the transition on the State of the Union address and during the budget process. John Bridgeland, president and chief executive of Civic Enterprises, says organizers want to take 9/11, this day of tragedy, and turn it into a movement of service and transformation. And that's by increasing the number of Americans who volunteer from 61 million a year to 100 million by the year 2020. Now watch a little bit of the room. Senator Barack Obama on the stage talking to some of the people gathered there.
Please take your seats or sit down. Back in 10 seconds. 7 seconds. 6, 5 seconds. 4.
Senator Obama, one of the, of course, enormous consequences of 9/11 were the wars in Afghanistan and then Iraq. In the wake of those wars, today the United States military is facing enormous challenges. Junior officers are leaving the Army in record numbers. The recent graduates of West Point leaving the Army. What would you do as president to make serving and staying in the military more attractive to young men and women?
Well, first of all, as Commander-in-Chief, my job is to keep America safe. And that means ensuring that we've got the best military on earth, and that means having the best persons in uniform on earth. We have that right now, but as a consequence of these wars, they have been strained incredibly. I think it's important for us to increase the size of our Army and our Marines so that we can reduce the pace of tours that our young men and women are on. I think it's important for us to work towards increasing military pay. I think the passage of the GI Bill was extraordinarily important as a message to our men and women in uniform that when you serve our country, we will stand by you. I think about my grandfather who served in Patton's Army in World War II. He joined after Pearl Harbor. And we were talking off camera about where did I get this sense of service. I think about my grandparents' generation. My grandfather, after Pearl Harbor, joined the military. My grandmother, who had just had a baby at Fort Leavenworth, stayed back and worked on a bomber assembly line. There was a total mobilization. And when my grandfather came back, he came back to a GI Bill that was going to pay for his college education and FHA loans that would help them purchase a home. There was that sense of sacred obligation that, frankly, we have lost during these last two wars. I want to restore that. But it's also important that a president speaks to military service as an obligation, not just of some, but of many. You know, I travel obviously a lot over the last 19 months, and if you go to small towns throughout the Midwest or the Southwest or the South, every town has tons of young people who are serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not always the case in other parts of the country, in more urban centers. And I think it's important for the president to say, this is an important obligation. If we are going into war, then all of us go, not just some.
Well, to that end, to get the best and brightest into the military, this university, your alma mater, invited President Ahmadinejad of Iran to be here last year. But they haven't invited ROTC to be on campus since 1969. Right. Should Columbia and elite universities that have excluded ROTC invite them back on campus?
Yes. I think we've made a mistake on that. I recognize that there are students here who have differences in terms of military policy, but the notion that young people here at Columbia or anywhere in any university aren't offered the choice, the option of participating in military service, I think is a mistake. That does not mean that we disregard any potential differences in various issues that are raised by students here. But it does mean that we should have an honest debate while still offering opportunities for everybody to serve, and that's something that I'm pretty clear about.
You were saying a moment ago that you think there should be more young people serving in the military. We need a broader demographic cross-section. How do you do that short of a draft?
Well, again, I think that inspiring young people to serve is something that the president is uniquely positioned to do. Now, it doesn't always have to be service in uniform. One of the things that if you talk to our generals, they are desperate for is a civilian counterpart to our military forces. Our military is the best in the world, but they are asked to do so many different things because our civilian operations, our State Department, USAID, have been underfunded, have atrophied, and for us to say, serve in the military, but if that's not where you want to serve, learn a foreign language and go into the foreign service. And by the way, we will deploy you in some difficult areas, but that's part of what it means to be an American and to serve and to sacrifice. We need agricultural specialists in places like Afghanistan. We need civil engineers that can do some of the work that currently our military officers are doing. And so I think a president who is consistently asking for young people to reach for something higher, something bigger than themselves, I think we'll get an enormous response.
We have only a couple of minutes left in this segment. You mentioned last week on George Stephanopoulos' show that you'd actually considered signing up for the military yourself. And you seem to imply that if there was a war going on, you might have been more inclined. Is there anything more important about serving in the military during wartime than peacetime?
Well, there's no doubt that if there are wars going on and some are being asked to sacrifice their lives, that I think you have to ask yourself, why them instead of you? And so I think there are special obligations during wartime. But look, we need military. We always have potential conflicts around the world, and our military has to remain strong and ready. And so I want to encourage military service as well as other ways of serving, regardless of whether there's war or not. But I do think that over the last several years, the fact that the burden has been shouldered by such a narrow group is a problem. And how we treat those young people, by the way, when they come home, continues to be a problem. One of my components in terms of national service is having a Veterans Corps where we are mobilizing citizens to pair up and provide support to our veterans who are coming home, making sure they have the resources, making sure employers are reaching out to them, giving them opportunities to transition into civilian life much more effectively than they're getting right now.
Brief question, because I think we just have a minute. This is from an online question from Gina in Bloomfield, Michigan. She says, how possible would it be to give military-style benefits to non-military citizens who do national service work full-time?
Well, I think it depends on the kind of service that's being provided. As I said, if we are building the kind of foreign service and that is expeditionary, that is going into very difficult, dangerous areas, to carry out the civilian side of the work of helping a country like Afghanistan rebuild, then we should think about what are the benefits of that service. Oftentimes those people are putting themselves at great harm. They are being deployed and their families are undergoing similar sacrifices to the sacrifices that those who are serving in the military are. But I do think that we have a special obligation for those who have put their lives at risk, who are risking life and limb on behalf of the security of America. That does not mean that we can't provide other avenues of service. For example, I've said we desperately need teachers, math and science teachers in particular. And so for us to provide full scholarships for those who are willing to get their teaching certificate, get educated in these fields, and then be placed in some of the most underserved communities in the country, that's something that we should be willing to pay for so that people who want to serve anyway at least can afford it.
We'll be right back with our last segment.
More from Senator Barack Obama in a couple minutes. At the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia today, a ceremony was held to dedicate a 9/11 memorial. The 2-acre park consists of 184 benches, each bearing the name of someone who died at the Pentagon 7 years ago. At night, the benches will glow with light. Here's part of the ceremony there.
In honor of the fallen, a wreath will be laid at the locator stone in the Pentagon Memorial. Laying the wreath will be the 15th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers, American Airlines flight attendant, Miss Deborah Matlin Rowland, and Medal of Valor recipient, Lieutenant David Webster, a Pentagon Force Protection officer. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise.
At that event today, Defense Secretary Robert Gates said that the future generations won't directly feel the heat, smell the smoke, or know the horror of 9/11, but that the Pentagon Memorial will tell the story. See that entire Pentagon ceremony immediately after this candidates program. More now from Democratic presidential nominee Barack Obama on volunteering in America.
Thank you very much. Everybody take your seats.
Senator Obama, this question of whether or not national service would be elevated to a cabinet-level position, among other things, Senator McCain said that if it were that, he would ask you to be his secretary. Would you ask him, if you're elected president,
well, I mean, if this is the deal he wants to make right now, I am committed to appointing him to my cabinet in national service. Look,
would you be willing to serve in his cabinet?
We've got a little work to do before we get to that point. Senator McCain's service is legendary, and one of the wonderful things about this campaign, I think, is his ability to share that story and himself inspire a whole new generation of young people to model what he did for this country. And so I think that one of the primary objectives of my presidency would be to lift up the opportunities for service in a bipartisan fashion so that we take it out of politics. Just very briefly, I want to give an example. There was a young man in Montana that I met named Matt Kuntz, who had been an infantry officer in the Army, was injured, was honorably discharged, got a law degree, and was working in corporate law. His half-brother served in the National Guard in Iraq, came back with post-traumatic stress disorder, was unable to get the counseling he needed, and ended up committing suicide. And Matt, having watched this painful process and trying to intervene, decided to quit his corporate law job and decided that he was going to take upon himself to create an advocacy group in Montana just around post-traumatic stress disorder for veterans. And now Montana has the best post-traumatic stress disorder treatment programs for National Guardsmen. And Matt has continued now in the non-profit sector. I make this point because I never asked Matt whether he was Democrat or Republican. I never asked Matt whether he was liberal or conservative. What I knew was that he had seen a wrong and was inspired to take action. And that kind of message, I think, is what has to be communicated each and every day by our president, by our political culture, and that's one of the reasons I'm running for president.
We asked Senator McCain the same question about Governor Palin's belittling being a community organizer. Did the Democrats in return belittle being a small-town mayor? Was she being unfair? Or was it hypocritical because Republicans actually say, hey, what people do in their private life is more important than public service?
Well, listen, we've had an awful lot of small-town mayors at the Democratic convention, I assure you. I meet them all the time. And the mayors have some of the toughest jobs in the country because that's where the rubber hits the road. You know, we yak in the Senate. They actually have to fill potholes and trim trees and make sure the garbage is taken away. So I was surprised by the several remarks around community organizing and belittling it. You know, when I think about the choice I made as a 23, 24-year-old to spend 3 years working with churches to help people help themselves, no insult to the president of this fine institution, but it was the best education I ever had because it taught me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're given a chance and when they're brought together. And that's something I want to encourage for every young person. I want every young person around this country to recognize they will not fulfill their full potential until they hitch their wagon to something bigger. Now, that's not to say that we need talent in the private sector. We want talent in the private sector. But there are so many ways of serving voluntarily. You don't have to take the same path I did. But that's something that's a message that I think everyone should want to encourage, and I hope the Republicans want to encourage that as well.
Senator, picking up on this tone in the political campaigns,
Right.
So much is said that's critical about people who are in Washington, the way
Right.
Washington works,
Right.
bureaucrats
Right.
in Washington. How much responsibility do you think you and other presidential candidates, this year they're just the two of you major party candidates, have to change the rhetoric so that people who work in government, work in public service are respected?
Well, I think you make an important point. Look, Washington is broken, my whole campaign has been premised from the start on the idea that we have to fundamentally change how Washington works, that the domination of special interests, the domination of lobbyists, the loss of a civic culture in Washington among public servants has led to not only well-known disasters like the mismanagement of the Katrina situation, but quiet disasters where you've got entire agencies that have been hollowed out and you've got political appointees who aren't concerned with the mission of those organizations. So we've got to transform Washington and we've got to do some house cleaning. But what we also want to do is to remind young people that if it weren't for government, then we wouldn't have a Civil Rights Act. If it weren't for government, we would not have the interstate highway system. If it weren't for government, we would not have some of our parks and natural wilderness areas that are so precious to America. And so part of my job, I think, as president, is to make government cool again. And to say to young people, to say to young people, even as we're transforming Washington, come on, we want you. We want you to get involved at every level. And by the way, you don't even have to join government. Part of what we're going to do is create transparency and accountability in how government works so that you can be an active citizen holding your public servants and elected officials accountable. That's one other aspect of citizenship, is paying attention to what's taking place. And part of what I've been thrilled about during the course of this campaign is how energized people have been, how interested people are. I mean, the viewership, both for the Democratic and Republican convention, broke all records. You know, we have seen the kinds of volunteerism in our own campaign, which, by the way, we're channeling not just to work on our campaign. We've had 1,000 hours of community service by our volunteers, not organized by us, but organized by themselves. And that's the kind of opportunity that I think we have to tap into.
Now, you mentioned civic participation is at an all-time high. Basically, you mentioned voluntary associations before. Back in the 19th century, the famous French scholar de Tocqueville came here and said, you know, America's voluntary associations make it unique and special. Right. Is volunteerism, is national service part of American exceptionalism? Is it part of what makes America special?
Yes. We have always balanced the tradition of individual responsibility and self-reliance with notions of community and love for country, in part because of voluntary associations. What it's done is it's allowed people to exercise the freedom to determine the direction of their communities, but still recognizing that we are part of a common project of creating a better life for the next generation. And that's something that's been lost. But what we're seeing in this campaign is it's something that people want to restore. And it requires responsibilities. I mean, part of what is interesting about our campaign, for example, is that when young people come in, we work them like dogs. I mean, and they are given big responsibilities. One of the striking things when you visit our troops in Iraq or Afghanistan, you've got 22, 23-year-old platoon leaders who are taking on life and death responsibilities and decision-making. We sell too many of our citizens short. They want to be involved, but we've got to start early. And that's part of the reason why I want to make sure that we've got opportunities in high school, we've got opportunities in college, that we help schools create a civic education system that involves community service so that these values are transmitted to the next generation. And I think parents would be thrilled to have their kids turn off the video game and get out there and do something. And you know what? It turns out the kids would appreciate it as well.
Is there a president or an administration that would be a model for you? I mean, everybody talks about what John Kennedy asked the country to do, but John Kennedy or any other president?
Well, look, I think what Kennedy did at a time of enormous change was to look out into the horizon and say, this is where America needs to go. Not just to the moon, but all sorts of new frontiers. And then he created structures like the Peace Corps to channel the idealism that he tapped. I think Bill Clinton, in setting up AmeriCorps, again, created structures, but tapped into idealism that was already there. I think it is right below the surface. And so my goal...
Any Republican president come to mind?
Well, Teddy Roosevelt, I think, was an activist president who understood how we mobilize our citizens means that we hold all our institutions accountable, public and private. And that's why one of the premises of our campaign from the start has been that change happens from the bottom up. It doesn't happen from the top down. It happens because the American people look up and they say, we imagine a world not as it is, but as it should be, and we are willing to roll up our sleeves and put in the hard work to change this country block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, state by state. And that, I think, is the kind of president I would like to be, is one that inspires more of that feeling and provides the avenues to express it.
Senator Barack Obama, thank you very much for joining us for this Presidential Candidates Service Nation Forum. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.